Hi students, so we're going to be reading chapters 4, 5, and 6 from Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes. And so here we go. Chapter 4 is titled A Secret No Longer. For several weeks, it seemed that the prayers and good luck symbols that had done their work well. Sadako felt strong and healthy, and she ran longer and faster every day. But all that ended one crisp, cold winter day in February. Sadako was running in the schoolyard, and suddenly everything seemed to whirl around her, and she sank to the ground. One of the teachers rushed over to help. I guess I'm just tired, Sadako said in a weak voice. When she tried to stand up, her legs went wobbly, and then she fell down again. The teacher sent Mitsu home to tell Mr. Sasaki. He left his barbershop and took Sadako to the Red Cross hospital. As they entered the building, Sadako felt a pang of fear. That's one of our vocab words, pang. Part of this hospital was especially for those with the atom bomb sickness. In a few minutes, Sadako was in an examining room where a nurse x-rayed her chest and took some of her blood. Dr. Numata tapped her back and asked a lot of questions. 3 other doctors came in, and they looked at Sadako. One of them shook his head and then gently stroked her hair, like he felt bad for her. By now, the rest of Sadako's family was at the hospital. Her parents were in the doctor's office, and Sadako could hear the murmur of their voices. Once, her mother cried, "Leukemia? That's impossible." At the sound of that frightening word, Sadako put her hands over her ears. She didn't want to hear anymore. Of course she didn't have leukemia. The atom bomb hadn't even scratched her. Nurse Yasunanga took Sadako to one of the hospital rooms and gave her a kind of cotton kimono to wear. Sadako had just climbed into bed when her family came in. Mrs. Sasaki put her arms around Sadako. "You must stay here for a little while," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "But I'll come every evening. And we'll visit you after school," Masahiro promised. Mitsu and Iji nodded, their eyes wide and scared. "Do I really have the atom bomb disease?" Sadako asked her father. There was a troubled look in Mr. Sasaki's eyes, but he only said, "The doctors want to make sure, and they want to take some tests. That's all." He paused. Then he added, "They might keep you here for a few weeks." A few weeks? To Sadako, it sounded like years. She would miss graduation into junior high school, and even worse, she would not be part of the racing team. Sadako swallowed hard and tried not to cry. Mrs. Sasaki fussed over Sadako. She plumped the pillows and smoothed the bedspread. Mr. Sasaki cleared his throat. Is there anything you want?" he asked. Sadako shook her head. All she really wanted was to go home. But when? A cold lump of fear grew in her stomach. She had heard that many people who went into this hospital never came out. Later, Nurse Yasunanga sent the others away so that Sadako could rest. When she was alone, Sadako buried her face in the pillow and cried for a long time. She had never before felt so lonely and miserable. Chapter 5, The Golden Crane. Remember, guys, she's 11, almost 12. So she's about the same age as most of you. The next morning, Sadako woke up slowly. She listened for the familiar voices of her mother making breakfast, but they were only the new and different sounds of a hospital. Sadako sighed. She had hoped that yesterday was just a bad dream. It was even more real when Nurse Yasunanga came in and gave her a shot. Getting shots is part of being in the hospital, the plump nurse said briskly. You'll get used to it. I don't think she's all that nice. I just want the sickness to be over with, Sadako said unhappily, so I can go home. That afternoon, Shizuku was Sadako's first visitor. She smiled mysteriously as she held something behind her back. Shut your eyes, she said. While Sadako squinted her eyes tightly shut, Shizuku put some pieces of paper and scissors on the bed. Now you can look, she said. What is it? Sadako asked, staring at the paper. Shizuku was pleased with herself. I figured out a way for you to get well, she said proudly. Watch. She cut a piece of gold paper into a large square, and in a short time she had folded it over and over into a beautiful crane. Sadako was puzzled. But how can that paper bird make me well? Don't you remember that old story about the crane? Shizuku asked. It's supposed to live for 1,000 years. If a sick person folds 1,000 paper cranes, the gods will grant her wish and make her healthy again. She handed the crane to Sadako. Here's your first one. Sadako's eyes filled with tears. How kind of Shizuku to bring a good luck charm, especially when her friend didn't really believe in such things. Sadako took the golden crane and made a wish. The funniest little thing and the funniest little feeling came over her when she touched the bird. It must be a good omen. Thank you, Shizuku-chan, she whispered. I will never part from it. When she began to work with the paper, Sadako discovered that folding a crane wasn't as easy as it looked. With Shizuku's help, she learned how to do the difficult parts. And after making 10 birds, Sadako lined them up on the table beside the golden crane. Some were a bit lopsided, but it was a beginning. Now I've only 990 to make, Sadako said. With the golden crane nearby, she felt safe and lucky. Why, in a few weeks, she'd be able to finish the 1,000. Then she'd be strong enough to go home. That evening, Masahiro brought Sadako's homework from school. When he saw the cranes, he said, There isn't enough room on that small table to show off your birds. I'll hang them from the ceiling for you. Sadako was smiling all over. Do you promise to hang every crane I make? She asked. Masahiro promised. That's fine, Sadako said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Then you'll hang the whole 1,000? 1,000? Her brother groaned. You're joking. Sadako told him the story of the cranes. Masahiro ran a hand through his straight black hair. You tricked me, he said with a grin, but I'll do it anyhow. He borrowed some thread and tacks from Nurse Yasunanga and hung the first 10 cranes. The golden crane stayed in its place of honor on the table. After supper, Mrs. Sasaki brought Mitsu and Iji to the hospital. Everyone was surprised to see the birds. They reminded Mrs. Sasaki of a famous old home. Now remember, in Asian or specifically Japanese culture, they write a lot of what they called haikus, which were about nature. And so they're only a few lines long, and this is one example of it. So, out of colored paper cranes come flying into our house. Simple as that. Mitsu and Iji looked like the golden crane best, but Mrs. Sasaki chose the tiniest one made of fancy green paper with pink parasols on it. So a parasol is another word for like an umbrella, but it's the fancy umbrella that girls used to use to like more so protect them from the sun. And so it's called a parasol. This is my choice, she said, because small ones are the most difficult to make. After visiting hours, it was lonely in the hospital room. So lonely that Sadako folded more cranes to keep up her courage. 11. I wish I'd get better. 12. I wish I'd get better. Chapter 6. Kenji. Everyone saved paper for Sadako's good luck cranes. Shizuku brought colored paper from the bamboo class. Father saved every scrap from the barber shop. Even Nurse Yasununga gave Sadako the wrappings from packages of medicine. And Masahiro hung every one of the birds, as he had promised. Sometimes he strung many on one thread. The biggest cranes flew alone. During the next few months, there were times when Sadako felt almost well. However, Dr. Numata said it was best for her to stay in the hospital. Do you remember how long originally she was supposed to be there? About 2 weeks. It's now been a few months. Not a couple, a few, which means probably at least 3 or 4. By now, Sadako realized that she had leukemia. But she also knew that some patients recovered from the disease. She never stopped hoping that she would get well too. On good days, Sadako was busy. She did her homework, wrote letters to friends and pen pals, and amused her visitors with games, riddles, and songs. In the evening, she always made paper cranes. Her flock grew to over 300. Now the birds were perfectly folded. Her fingers were sure and worked quickly without any mistakes. Gradually, the atom bomb disease took away Sadako's energy. She learned about pain. Sometimes throbbing headaches stopped her from reading and writing. At other times, her bones seemed to be on fire. And more dizzy spells sent Sadako into deep blackness. Often she was too weak to do anything but sit by the window and look longingly out at the maple tree in the courtyard. She would stay there for hours, holding the golden crane in her lap. Sadako was feeling especially tired one day when Nurse Yasununga wheeled her out into the porch for some sunshine. There Sadako saw Kenji for the first time. He was 9 and small for his age. Sadako stared at his thin face and shining dark eyes. "Hello," she said. "I'm Sadako." Kenji answered in a low, soft voice. And soon the two were talking like old friends. Kenji had been in the hospital for a long time, but he had few visitors. His parents were dead, and he had been living with an aunt in a nearby town. "She's so old that she comes to see me only once a week," Kenji said. "I read most of the time." Sadako turned away at the sad look on Kenji's face. "It doesn't really matter," he went on with a weary sigh, "because I'll die soon." I have leukemia from the bomb.